Birdsong in springtime. A winter landscape. The time is out of joint. Oh, cursed spite that ever I was born to set it right. Nay, come, let's go together. This is the gateway building at the beginning of the Steyning Downland Scheme. And this is me. I promise not to appear too often because these are the people that I'm filming. We're members of a prayer walk and we join together once a month, 8 o'clock in the morning, come rain or shine, and we pray for the Steyning Downland Scheme. But as the name implies, it's a prayer walk. And so we walk over the land of the scheme and stop at various points to pray for people, for the land, for its use, for spiritual well-being.
Yeah.
Morning. But to understand the spirituality that lies behind the scheme, you first have to understand the scheme itself. And for that you have to know just a little bit about nature. This, for instance, is Nightingale Lane, and we always begin our walk by walking up here. We've lost, apparently, in the last 60 years or so, something like 38 million birds from Britain. That's 1 in 5 of them all. But here in Nightingale Lane, just about here, in this tree or these trees, you can hear in spring nightingales sing at particular times of day. Nightingales now are such a rarity. There are no nightingales, for instance, in London anymore. 90% of the species has been lost in the last 50 years. And yet they're here on the Steyning Downland Scheme. Just one of the many glories of the scheme. We have so much to give thanks for. And that's part of the role of the scheme, to give thanks to God for his creation, of which we are a part. There were two people in particular that I wanted to speak to. Rick Goring, whose family very generously gave the use of the land to the Steyning Downland Scheme for people to enjoy from the Steyning area and beyond, and Matthew Thomas, who's the project manager. He makes sure that the practical aspects of the scheme are dealt with on a day-to-day basis, and it's he who keeps the whole thing running. So Rick, when did SDS start and why?
So SDS started back, well, long ago if you listen to Mum, because Mum's always a visionary, which means she's always got thoughts and ideas bubbling around. And she had always been passionate about this bit of land engaging better with the people who were on it. Now, quite a lot of people on it were actually young people coming out of Steyning, out of the Steyning Grammar School or other places, either riding mountain bikes or just hanging out and getting away from the town. And it really started to gain momentum when Mum and Dad had a walk through here with Peter Harris, who was head of A Rocha. And he had said, you know, guys, this is a real opportunity to bring together people and the local natural land that surrounds them. And that then got catalysed by some mountain bikers using this bit just in front of us here. And they were making great use of some badger sets, which caused an exciting conversation on the trees, which was being nailed up, I think, at the time, where the estate manager at the time, William, put up a note saying, you can't ride mountain bikes here, it's off the bridleway, and there's a badger set here. And then a note underneath saying, oh, we didn't realise it was a badger set, we didn't know what a badger set looked like. Where can we go that there aren't badger sets? And then he said, well, if we meet up, we might be able to have a conversation about it. And that conversation kind of went down the tree and ended up in a meeting at St Mary's Church just up the road here at Wisson, where we put out an invite to anyone who was interested, whether they were interested in nature, interested in mountain biking, interested in young people, interested in farming, interested in any aspect really of what might happen on this bit of land. And we were amazed by how many people turned up. And just as it began to grow, and I was thinking, oh, this is exciting from a distance, Dad said, now Rick, you're excited by people and nature. I think this is a perfect project for you. So as the kind of moment of, oh, how are we actually going to deal with all these people who are interested in this space, Dad threw the rugby ball in my direction, and I've been trying to work out what to do with it ever since, probably.
As a result of that first meeting in 2007, Steyning Downland Scheme became a formal charity in 2009. Matthew Thomas has been part of the scheme for the past 9 years.
I was particularly attracted by the way that it combines my Christian faith with the natural environment. So I was an ecologist before I was a Christian, but I've never found a way of combining the two very effectively until I saw this job advertised. And it was quite amazing really to see that they were looking for somebody with a Christian background who was also into the natural world. And so I think that's what particularly attracted me to it.
What does your job actually involve?
My goodness, Nigel, how long have you got? It's quite varied. So my job title is project manager. And that means just about everything really. So from looking after the finances through to arranging events, managing events, through to organising teams of volunteers to do various different jobs on the scheme, such as monitoring different plant and animal groups, through to managing the actual habitat. And then we have a wonderful team of Dexter cattle who are around here somewhere that are looked after by a Looker team. And so we need to keep those heading in the right direction too. So it's a little bit of everything really, just sort of floating across but not getting too involved because the volunteers do all the hard work.
What has the scheme achieved? Rick Goring.
The hope is that we've achieved an ability for people to get involved in the land rather than thinking of it as a kind of something out there that somebody else is either worrying about or managing or doing something with. And so the real heart of the project was, how do you link people into the land that sits around them, and how do we start to have a bit of agency in the decisions we're making and take responsibility for that at the same time, rather than it being something that's always kind of somebody else's, either someone's problem or someone else's fortune or anything else. It was saying, well, actually, how do we actually engage people with that? So I'd say one of the great successes of the project has been the number of volunteers who've been involved in it over that period of time. And over that longer than a decade now, we've had hundreds of volunteers who've been involved in the project, on the steering group, and have really started to grow to love this place. And what's really interesting is when people start to really love a place, that causes some interesting conversations because they love it for different reasons. But then you see the relationships begin to build. And the most exciting bit is when you have people with very different opinions about something, but they still keep in relationship with one another because they go, do you know what? We're still stuck in this place, so we've still got to resolve this and get through it. And actually those are the most exciting parts, which have been the conversations that have grown and learning, okay, there are different ways of seeing this piece of landscape on the outskirts of Steyning. So that's that journey that people have built and started to trust one another, I think is one of the most exciting things. And I've loved meeting different people involved in the scheme over the 10 years.
I've obviously got a lot of background in nature conservation and ecology, so I understand a bit about how the habitats and the species work. I've also been a church pastor for 13 years, so I understand a bit about how people work, although I've learnt a great deal since starting this job, I have to say. So, and I think it's that essential combination of skills really, understanding people and the environment, that can make this project work.
It's also from a wildlife point of view, there's been some really exciting things like the Duke of Burgundy deciding to come and make its home back here after a very long time of being away. There's been some fantastic work with the mountain bikers to make a much better space for them and much better engagement with the mountain bikers. and there's a whole lot of projects with the pond, with the fencing, which has enabled grazing, which means the grassland, which is chalk grassland, so special, hasn't just scrubbed over completely. So there's been a number of different things that almost, because they happen slowly, if you're involved, you don't always see them, but then you look back and go, gosh, actually, yeah, if that hadn't happened, that would all be brambles and there wouldn't be any orchids, and it would have gone in this direction, or just become just dog walkers or whatever. So I think part of the excitement is that we've still got a variety of different people using the site and still holding those different perspectives on it.
Well, we have a very old pond that goes back to medieval times, and it has a leak in the dam. So the dam was built, nobody's really sure when initially, it's been rebuilt several times since. And the current dam has a crack in it, which is slightly concerning, but it also has a hole underneath it. So we're not able to control water levels in the pond. So we're going to have to dredge out a lot of silt and find out where the leaks are, and then repair them with a stuff called puddling clay, which is an impervious clay that will prevent water from getting through outside.
That presumably costs a great deal of money. So where does all the money come from for the scheme?
All of the money for the scheme, well, almost all of it, comes from local people that donate. And we do get some trust funding that comes into one-off spending for particular projects, but most of it is regular donations from local people, which is amazing and very generous.
How many volunteers are there approximately?
Well, we're just coming out of COVID, Nigel, so it's difficult to tell because we've been through quite a tricky period, I think, where we have potentially lost a bit of momentum. But certainly going into COVID, we had over 150 people on the register, as it were, doing all sorts of different jobs. There's one lovely guy who comes in once a year and does all our audits all our accounts for us. And we don't see him other than that, but he does a brilliant job that would otherwise be very difficult to do. Others are here literally almost every day, or certainly every week, doing practical jobs. So, as I said, we've just coming out of COVID, so there's been a little bit of a hiatus, and let's hope we manage to get things moving again and have that sort of numbers volunteering again.
But this is land which is actually part of Wiston Estate. What ownership do you feel towards it? What view do you have of the land on which you're standing?
Very good question, Nigel. Ownership is a really interesting question when it comes to land. So our family have been here since 1743. So my ancestors grew up in Wiston House down the road here and planted Chanctonbury Ring. And then we moved out as a family in 1924. And that sense of owning things when it's actually over a very long period of time starts to look a lot more like stewardship than ownership. And really it's a question of who's going to carry responsibility for something. So rather than it, in our modern world, one of the challenges is that we often see ownership and wealth as kind of the most important thing, and people think, oh, well, I want to own that money or whatever. We don't always see, well, what does responsibility for that look like? How does that balance? And so when it's land, we're not taking it with us. There's no one, I'm not taking this anywhere, but I won't be taking anything with us. So you can't hold on to it, or if you do hold on to it, it's not really of anyone's benefit. And so from a Wiston Estate point of view, the purpose of the Wiston Estate, which is to restore, well, foster a rural meeting place where people, nature and enterprise coexist and flourish, this is a kind of microcosm of that, where we're particularly focused here on people and nature. And other parts of the estate, we're looking at enterprise and how do we build rural business and make that sustainable. Here we're thinking, how do you really bring people and nature together? And one of the key things is to take responsibility for how do our actions impact the land. And so ownership here is one that we ultimately own it as a family, we hold it, and it's our responsibility in the end as to what happens here and what's going on. But we're wanting to share that responsibility and that engagement with others.
What are the particular challenges, though, of working with volunteers?
Well, I think it's a challenge and an opportunity, because the people who get involved with the scheme are already motivated and keen to do things. But at the same time, you're always waiting for somebody to say, oh dear, I'm too busy, I need to do something else. And it's always a challenge, I think, to keep people working together as a team, when everybody's got their own interests and their own particular favourite area of the scheme that they want to get involved with. So it's reconciling different interests and different specialisms: dog walkers, nature conservationists, mountain bikers.
There are balances to be struck, and inevitably the way some people treat the land and the space raise important questions.
It depends, if I'm honest, on how they're using it. So when I see people taking pleasure by walking a dog, or when you get up here and see the kids, we used to do a number of discovery days with Steyning Grammar School, and you see the children asking questions about it and really starting to engage in, why do you do this? Why don't you have this? And what about that? And that seems interesting. That is amazing and brings huge excitement. And I'm passionate about how do our children engage in the land that we're ultimately going to hand onto them. And I'm not talking about our children, I'm talking about that in a much wider sense of this planet that we are going to be handing on to the next generation. That fills me with huge hope and excitement. I think there are other things that go on where you see rubbish, or you see sometimes an entitlement that can come with it of, well, I can do what I want. That's saddening, and only because it pushes against the space of going, this is about we've been given this, we're wanting to give this. With that gift comes a sense of accepting it well, I suppose. And when that's happening, that is just a huge excitement to see people engaging in the right way with this bit of land. Litter, dog poo, stuff like that is less good. And one feels like, oh gosh, we've still got a message, care.
Which extends to care for the environment. Tell me about ash dieback.
Well, ash dieback has been one of our many challenges over the years. So the woodland behind us here is a big bank of woodland on the horseshoe. I'd say it's probably 70% ash trees. And I think it was about 11 or 12 years ago now we first heard that this new disease, ash dieback, was on its way to the UK. And it then arrived with an absolute thunderclap of suddenly dying trees about 5-6 years ago. And so you go to parts of the horseshoe now and it looks a bit like napalm has been hit. It's just completely dead. So it's caused quite a few challenges for us because it's created some dangerous areas on our footpaths and bridleways. So we're going to have to control that by cutting back the trees slowly, but also leaving areas where natural regeneration can occur and just see what comes back. So it could be a blessing in disguise. We could have all sorts of interesting things coming back afterwards.
What kind of particular things are unique to the scheme? Well, not necessarily unique to the scheme, but special to the scheme. I'm thinking of butterflies, I'm thinking of numbers of species of birds, I'm thinking of that kind of thing that you wouldn't necessarily see in other schemes, but you do see here.
Well, I suppose our long-standing claim to fame has been the brown hair streak butterfly, which lives off blackthorn and only breeds on blackthorn at a certain stage of its development. And through a series of random events, we somehow managed to have the best colony of brown hair streak butterfly in the whole of the UK. And that's really a combination of the way the land was managed and a few sort of deliberate mistakes in the way the land was managed that worked out quite fortuitously. But most recently, we've got the Duke of Burgundy butterfly come back to the Steyning Downland Scheme, which is a very rare chalkgrass and butterfly that's been absent from the whole of this downland really for decades, if not hundreds of years, and has just very recently come back after a lot of hard work from the volunteers doing new habitat creation.
How many different species of birds have we actually had on the SDS?
Well, I have a very dedicated team of birders to thank for this, because they're out here at least once a month, very early in the morning on Sundays, counting all the birds. And last year we crossed an amazing threshold of 100 species of bird that have been seen on this scheme. And I think we're up to 103 species. That includes some quite rarities like nightingale and nightjar too, which have both been seen on the scheme in recent years. And we think nightingale is actually nesting here too, which is a wonderful thing. So for a bit of land this size, 160 odd acres, to have over 100 species of bird here is pretty remarkable and testament to everything the volunteers do. So that's really nice to see. And we're standing on quite a rare habitat here, this chalk grassland, which looks a bit shaggy at this time of year in the middle of winter. But if you come back in the summer, it's absolutely full of flowers, covered in blue butterflies, and looks an amazing picture. So that's a rare habitat. Less than 4% of the South Downs, I think, now has chalk grassland on it. So.
And what's the role of the Dexters?
Well, their role really is living lawnmowers, I suppose you could describe them as. So the thing about chalk grassland is it needs to be grazed. It needs to, if we don't manage it, if we don't keep it cut back, if you like, scrub and woodland will eventually take over and we'll lose it. So we're constantly taking nutrients off the land, and you can do that by hand cutting, and that's what the volunteers do with some of the scrub and so on. But it's a much more effective way, a much more natural way too, is to simply graze it, bring animals onto the site, they chew off the grass, and that allows the more delicate wildflowers to come through this thick mat of grass.
For me, as a family, we have a strong Christian faith that really sits right at the base of what our values are and why we do what we do in the world. So our view would be that this is ultimately a gift from God that has been given to us to look after and steward, and that's a weird thing to say in a world that has less and less belief in God. But for us, that's really that is a core driver, because it also comes out of, well, what kind of God do we believe in? And so if that God, in our view, is forgiving and is wanting to enable change and restore things and bring hope, that's what we therefore want to bring to this land.
What are the benefits of people actually using this place? We're about to launch, or hoping to launch, something called Walk With Us. What does that mean for you?
So one of the amazing things about being out here is that it's not, it's humanly managed at times, but it's not in our control. We didn't make it. We can nudge it in different directions. If we're having a tough time, if there's a lot of pressure on us, a lot of that often is coming from people. It's often within a social construct that those pressures are being felt. One of the amazing things about being out here is that you're in a different construct that we haven't made up, we haven't built it. So the stress of holding all those things together can be released a bit, because you go, oh, do you know what? I had a terrible thing over here, a terrible meeting, a terrible whatever, and these trees and this stuff is still here.
We've been working quite closely with Mind the last couple of years, just encouraging people that have had mental health issues to come out into the countryside, enjoy the natural world. And there's all kinds of research that's been done over the years to show that there are actual physical and mental benefits from being in the countryside, just getting away from the hubbub of everyday life and enjoy the peace of the natural world. I think also from a spiritual point of view, which I'm obviously interested in, I think the church generally in the UK has kind of lost our contact a bit with the natural world. And it may be a reflection on what's happened in society generally, but I think if you read the Bible, there's an awful lot of connection between God's creation and man and people, and I think we need to perhaps rediscover that. And I think we'll find a richer understanding of God by getting back into his creation and understanding where we are in that world.
We're here with quite a number of churches around us. What role would you like to see churches playing in supporting Steyning Downland Scheme?
As I mentioned before, the desire here is really to try and bring different types of people onto the land. So the hope would be that in church we're quite good at going into churches and being in buildings, and we feel kind of safe in there, and whatever our church culture might be like, we kind of go, oh yeah, this is great, I like standing up for worship, or I like sitting down, or I like liturgy, or I like to sing songs, or whatever it might be. What I hope is that this would be a place where people come out of those comfort zones, perhaps, in those buildings, and get to engage with God out here in the land, and then think, okay, what does loving God and loving people look like here? And that this might then be a bridge for people who've never been into a church before and never experienced the love of God to feel that here and go, oh, that's interesting. This person has a completely different way of thinking about stuff to what I do, and they seem to have not judged me, and they seem to be just happily putting up a fence post with me alongside me. And so my real hope would be that people just get stuck in to doing stuff and being out here on the scheme, praying for it, praying for the land, praying for the community of Steyning here, and that it would be a real blessing to bring healing in actions rather than words.
So where exactly is God in the Steyning Downland Scheme? The answer is, he's everywhere and in everything. It wasn't until the 19th century and the Industrial Revolution that the idea of us as creatures being part of God's creation began to be separated out as people moved into towns. Now the idea of the scheme is to try to reunite that relationship between the people and the land. The land on which we stand is of so much value, and it can give us so much in return. So we're inviting you to join us, to walk alongside us, if you will. There's no doubt that there are people who value being out in the land for what it does to the brain, to the heart, to the soul, and sometimes to walk in companionship with another person is all that we need. Someone who'll listen quietly, not judge, but hear the story and accept us as we are. There are many things that may well happen in the scheme, for it never stands still. There's always something new coming along. One of those things is the possibility of developing an app that people can have on their phone to guide them around different aspects of the scheme, perhaps to give them some words so that they can be quiet and contemplate or pray, to be still and to be at one with nature. And drama, wouldn't it be wonderful if the rifle range where I'm standing now could be used occasionally as a backdrop for a kind of mini Wintershall, where the story of the gospel is told again by local people. So come and join us. Be a supporter of the scheme. Volunteer if that's what you would like to do. Walk with us on our prayer walks, or perhaps walking with us and walking with others. You'll be very welcome. We need you, and it's certainly true that all of us need God.